want to briefly talk about Mencius and the reading that we have for this week. The image here in the background is a famous thought experiment, as many philosophers have different thought experiments. What if, what would you do if these circumstances? And the one that is most famous from Mencius is the baby on the well. So a baby is teetering, tottering along the edge of a well, and you see it, and what do? Right? Mencius says that we have a hardwired reaction to panic, run, save the baby, right? Unthinking. So we see the baby on the edge of the well, and like my man here in the picture, we run out and we save the baby. No thought, right? No thinking at all. It's just what we do. We don't do it for money. We don't do it for the likes. We don't do it for any number of calculating reasons. We are hardwired to save that baby. And the conclusion here is that there's something in our nature that's good, right? That this suggests that at least within these very restricted circumstances, that we are good, right, by nature. And that is Mencius's thing. The dialogue we have is between Mencius, Cao Tzu, and Kung Tzu, and there's a mention of Confucius in it. So much like Plato's Republic, this is a dialogue back and forth, but it's mostly Mencius doing in the driver's seat here, right? Who is Mencius? He is a student of Confucius, and then he's in the kind of Confucian genealogy from Lao Tzu to Confucius to Mencius. I have the little question mark next to Lao Tzu. It's interesting. There's parallels between these three and Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, right? That we don't have Plato writes everything for Socrates. We don't have his writing. Similarly, the historical and scholarly consensus is that Lao Tzu is maybe fictional, maybe it was real, but not all that we remember him as. His writings were put together in the 1st century. So we don't really know. So question mark. But we know that is the genealogy from Lao Tzu, who, Warring States period, to Confucius, to Mencius in roughly the same time as the Greeks, right? 4th century. So the Greeks go from 5th century to 3rd century, from Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, the pre-Socratics being earlier than Socrates, of course. So about the same time. And the question is, are we good, right? And that is a big question, right? And the baby on the well suggests that maybe we are good. So what are some of the metaphors that we look at here? Are we good? When we look at an oak tree, is a wooden bowl, what is the relationship between the oak tree and the wooden bowl? So the question is, what is that relationship? What is the relationship between those two things? Is our good nature something that is violently carved out of us, like strapping the piece of wood to the lathe and going at it and carving the bowl, or is it something else? Mencius suggests it's something else. I just want to put a little mental pin here because this is relevant when we talk about Nietzsche, because Nietzsche thinks that our good, quote-unquote, morals are actually something that are kind of forced on us by a herd mentality, and that the things that we actually think are good, or the things that we actually think are bad are actually good, and the things that we're told to do we shouldn't do. And this all has to do with Nietzsche's feelings about Christianity and groupthink and all this stuff. Well, forget about Nietzsche for now. We're talking about Mencius. And Mencius thinks that it is not a violent process, right? That we are good by nature on some level. In our book, we go from Aristotle to Mencius to Hobbes. So there's this kind of weird ancient Greece, ancient East Asia to 1500s England. But the thinking of the three people is very good paired together, right? How does Aristotle feel about our human nature? And how does Mencius feel about it? And then how does Hobbes feel about it? We have a kind of transition from one to the next to the next. So what is his thing on human nature? He uses this metaphor of Ox Mountain. that this is a mountain that is verdant, there are trees, there's nature, but over the course of generations, it is hacked down, the trees are cut down, and it becomes barren. When a traveler walks by that area and looks at the mountain, can they deduce that it is barren by nature? Or is it made that way through specific circumstances? Coincidentally, I have here, I Googled Ox Mountain to see if I could find any pictures that would be relevant, and I got Ox Mountain Sanitary Landfill off San Mateo Road in Half Moon Bay, California. So one can imagine that whatever this Ox Mountain was before it was a sanitary landfill was maybe a nice place to be. But if you pour enough garbage on top of something, it's not going to be nice anymore. It's going to be a sanitary landfill that takes concrete. If you have questions, yes, they do take concrete. The other interesting twist in this metaphor, and it's one that I really like a lot from a kind of literary perspective, is when he talks about the night and day, and that the night is not enough to heal the mountain, right? The mist comes in, the night falls, the lumberjacks stop falling the trees, the cows go back to the barn or whatever, but it's not enough to heal Ox Mountain, right? That some things, sometimes it's too much harm, right? It's beyond repair, and that Ox Mountain is something that is presumably beyond repair. And I think that's really important when we think about human nature, right? That there is enough, when we think of like abuse or something like that, or just people who, when it becomes a kind of pathology, right? That one can pathologize certain things in a way that steers your nature in a certain way. Again, we can think of Aristotle, what he would agree with that. Mencius thinks we tend towards goodness, and that our nature follows opportunity, right? So he uses different metaphors at different points in time. The one in our reading is rivers that are controlled. The river water naturally runs down. It wants to run down. It is in the nature of water to run down. So this is like Aristotle again, saying it is in the nature of fire to burn up, and things like that. He also, in other writings, uses the metaphor of sprouts, right? That you plant seeds, you need to tend to the seeds, you need to water them, you need to take care of them. They need sunlight in order to grow, right? They're not magic beans. They don't just grow without any tending. And this, again, is very much like what Aristotle would say, right? That you need to tend to the virtues. You need to practice being virtuous in order for it to actually take hold. And you need to do it like all the time. Again, one sparrow does not a summer make. You need to be all in for virtuous action. How does Mencius differ from Aristotle? He differs in the sense that he introduces a very important idea, and that is that there are circumstances outside of our control, right? Ox Mountain did not choose to have the trees cut down and have it a grazing pasture for all of these sheep and goats or whatever. That there are circumstances outside of our control. It's not just about our self-discipline, right? Yeah, sure, that's a big part of it. Aristotle says yes, Mencius says yes. But Aristotle doesn't treat as much the idea that the circumstances are also important, and Mencius does. So that's a very important ethical addition to think about, that yes, we have agency. We can be good people or bad people. We can work on that. We can practice on being better and achieving that golden mean, or being virtuous and benevolent, etc. But that we are also embedded in circumstances outside of our control. Right, and that it's going to be more difficult given more adverse circumstances, and it's going to be easier given easier circumstances. And what that means is not necessarily a given. It's not to say, someone who's born, poor is somehow going to be less virtuous. Sometimes living in the lap of luxury can create all kinds of vice. Right, so it's not as though the circumstances map neatly onto any kind of contemporary understanding of the easy life or a difficult life, but it does acknowledge circumstance, and that's a big addition that Mencius makes in our evolving conversation on human nature. Next time, as indicated here in this little image, I don't want to give away too many memes here. The classic BLT of the state of nature, Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau. The next reading will be Hobbes. I will introduce a little Locke, and then we'll move on to Rousseau. I'll probably have a bit longer lecture on this delicious combination of European philosophers, but we'll save that for the holiday weekend. Thank you.